Hi, Penny. I'm so
Hi.
excited to be able to do this interview with you. I was thinking back on many, many years ago when I was kind of new to the field, and you were out there doing your wonderful work in Philadelphia, which is how I happened to hear about you. And then over time, you became our poet laureate of the adoption community, and we kept crossing paths at wonderful conferences. So you really are a legacy in our field for so many reasons, and I hope we get to touch on those in our brief half hour together. So, what would you like to say? I mean, rather than my introducing you and saying all the wonderful things I know about you, what would you like to say to introduce yourself to the folks watching this video?
Well, thinking about this today, I was thinking how lucky I was to come to as an adopted person at the time that I did. But I was in my mid 20s and I had never talked with another adopted person about being adopted. I knew other people who were adopted, but we had never talked about being adopted together. I had had an experience of waking up a little bit about wanting to know more about my origins when I was in the Peace Corps in Nigeria in the 60s, and a dog gave birth in my lap to 8 puppies. So I got to watch this birth up very close and personal. And it made me think about my birth mother giving birth to me.
Wow.
That was my first waking up experience. I went back to the agency when I left Nigeria, and they said, sorry, that bridge has been burned, and you will never, you wouldn't want to meet your birth mother anyway, because she went through a lot of pain in giving you up. And if you came back into her life now, you would be opening up a wound and hurt her terribly.
Oh, my.
That's what I said when I went back to my agency. I mean, that's what I heard from the social worker.
Yeah.
I was already a social worker myself, but no, I wasn't. Never mind. Um, but anyway, when I woke up again to the idea that maybe I could somehow find my birth mother, and that was around infertility, that I was not going to be having, I was not likely to be having a biological child who might look something like me.
Wow.
And then I got some help from my adoptive mother, who was very supportive to me. I had a lot of luck in the people who conceived me, the people who adopted me, and so forth. But around that very same time that I was waking up the second time because of my infertility, book came out, The Search for Anna Fisher.
Yes, I remember that book.
And I read that book in one night, sitting on the bathroom floor so as not to wake anybody up. And I went immediately to an ALMA meeting in New York City.
ALMA being the Adoptee Liberty Movement Association.
Yes, founded by Florence Fisher. And this was going to a Presbyterian church in Manhattan. And being so excited, I was wondering what other adopted people were going to look like. But the big thrill, because adopted people look like everybody else, but the big thrill was that I sat next to a woman exactly my age who had relinquished her baby.
Wow.
And that made my birth mother so much more real to me than she had ever been. It made her real.
Yes.
And that made me feel more real.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I couldn't wait to start some kind of group in Philadelphia. But guess what? I was in a very interesting adopted person position because I had gotten in touch with Jean Payton as well. Jean Payton and Florence Fisher were the two mothers of the adoptees' rights movement. And Jean Payton wanted me to form a chapter in Philadelphia of Orphan Voyage. And Florence Fisher wanted me to start a chapter of Alma in Philadelphia. And so here I was between two mothers again. So we started Adoption Forum of Philadelphia as an independent organization. And we wanted to include birth parents, adopted people, and adoption professionals.
When you say two mothers, Penny, both of those individuals were adopted people, but they were mothers. They were mothers to the movement, is what you mean.
Exactly.
Okay.
You got it. Yeah. And here I was just a little adoptee.
Yeah.
I was a daughter with a loyalty conflict.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, we started Adoption Forum, and that was thrilling.
What year was that, Penny?
1973.
Because this is like really early history in our movement. There really weren't other groups like that when you started. Yeah. That included everybody, that wrapped in everybody. Yeah.
Right. And then a few years later, not very many years later, Jean Payton kind of organized people to start what later became the American Adoption Congress.
Yes, which is still in existence today.
That's right. And I turned out to be the first elected president of that organization.
Wow. Yes.
Which was not my strong suit. I'm a pretty good writer, but there's a lot that I wasn't good at, and so I didn't last very long, or very comfortably. But I got to know people from all over who were doing more or less the same thing.
Some of our people who were there to start with you, Mari Jo Valera and Jim Gritter, some of those, Jim's still around, but Mari has passed away. Some of those early leaders that were at that meeting, I wish we had captured them as legacy members, because they were really the foundation upon which most of us stand, including you.
Mm-hmm. And Lee Campbell, who founded the Concerned United Birth Parents, is still around.
Yes.
And Pam Hasagawa,
yes,
is still around.
Yes.
And so I'm not the oldest living adoptee pioneer by well, I am one of the oldest.
Yes, you are.
We're still alive.
And who can still think straight and talk clearly.
Oh, thank you, Sharon.
Yeah.
Would now be a good time to read this poem that we were talking about?
I actually was also wondering, because you touched on infertility and how that spurred you forward as an adopted person. And all of this is such rich history for those folks who don't really have this background. So I'm wanting to stay with that for a minute. How did you solve your fertility issues, Penny? Did you become a mother yourself?
I did, by adopting.
Okay.
I have two kids, even though they're now, one's middle-aged and one's getting there. My first husband was a widower with a toddler whom I adopted. So that's a step parent adoption.
Uh-huh.
And my most recent husband was was not a parent already, and but I was in my 40s by then, and we adopted a 7-week-old baby who is now 36. He's biracial, and so that's a transracial adoption. And Nathan's birth mother decided that, well, she met Alan and me, and she decided he would be a great adoptive parent for Nathan because he was Jewish, and she thought of a Jewish man as good parents. And she thought I would be a good adoptive mother for Nathan because I was adopted, and that I would understand his adoption issues.
You did a very open adoption, didn't you?
So
at a time when that wasn't being done.
So it became an open adoption because I already knew about open adoption from the adoption community.
Yes.
And so we told her that even if we had to leave the Philadelphia area, we would make sure that at least twice a year she got to see Nathan. And we kept our promise. And it was only about when Nathan was maybe 30 that I kind of dropped out of that relationship and let him manage it, which I have to say is somewhat complicated, but it was time for me not to be in the middle of that anymore. And so, yeah. Yes. So I haven't had to place a child for adoption, but I've been on two sides of the triad.
Yes, yes. Is there anything about that experience that you would want people watching to understand? There's some deep wisdom there of having, and I know you also did a search to move towards the completion of your own life experience. Did you want to talk about that at all?
You're asking for hours and hours that yeah. I could talk about either of those things.
Well, you know,
I guess when I was thinking about this interview, I did think that maybe one of my contributions has been to be able to talk about my search experience and to normalize the search experience.
Yes.
And not that I can speak for other adoptees, or I certainly don't try to speak for all adopted people, but the thing that, if I have to boil down what it meant to me to know my own birth mother, is that it put ground under my feet.
Wow. Okay.
It grounded me psychologically, and it made me feel like a real person. Wow. You know, I have a couple of storybook figures that I have identified with a lot. One is Pinocchio, because he was not quite real, and he was kind of made up by his adoptive father. Mm-hmm. And through many adventures, he became a real boy. Yes. To himself, yes. as much as to anyone else. And I became much more real to myself when I had a biological background.
Okay.
And that I was part of the natural world.
Yes. Yes.
And so, I guess if I had to be remembered in two ways as contributing to adopted people's getting together and working on things to sort of building community, pulling people together to talk about adoption, making it more shareable. And the other thing is putting into words some of my own adopted person experience. And so I've written professional articles about adoption. I have an MSW, but mainly I've done it telling stories and writing poems.
Backing up for a minute, because I do want you to share some of your poetry, but who's the other figure? You said that you related to two figures. One was Pinocchio.
Pandora.
Pandora.
Yeah. I've written several poems using Pandora. And I did a performance piece as Pandora herself, which was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
I got into Pandora, identifying with her, because when we used to go on local talk shows, the question we always got as adopted people was, aren't you opening a Pandora's box? as if you're going to be finding all kinds of terrible things that are going to fly out of the box, and you're never going to be able to put them back, and it's going to be a big mistake. That was what Pandora meant.
Yes.
To those people who were asking that question.
Yes.
And so this other founder of Adoption Forum, Debbie Steinberg, do you remember the name? Yeah.
I do.
She went down to the Free Library of Philadelphia and she looked up Pandora, and she found out that when Pandora opened the box a second time, what was left in the box was hope. And if she hadn't let all those scary things out at first, we would never have gotten to hope.
Yes.
Isn't that wonderful?
It's one of your most beautiful poems. You have so many beautiful poems that reflect your life journey. That's one of my favorites, because I don't think most people know that. They don't know that about Pandora.
No. Do you want me to?
Yes, I'd love to have you read your poem about what you feel like you've contributed to the movement, because you are one of our legacy features.
Well, let me read the one I had in mind, and then if I can figure out which Pandora poem would suit, then I'll read that one too.
Okay.
This is called What I'm Proud of. When I searched for my birth family, I found 10 or 11 generations of ancestors, including real pilgrims, capital P, and revolutionary, capital R, soldiers. And my farthest back known female ancestor, Rachel Bouton, whose name means black button. And someone who founded the farthest west chapter of the Daughters of the Confederacy. And someone in the Arkansas legislature when they voted to become a state. And Michael from Monaghan, who fought for the Union and settled in a sod house. And a doctor whose heart was broken by a land scam. And a superintendent of schools who almost died when his grandson was kicked out of school for drilling a hole between the boys' and girls' bathroom. And someone beheaded by a buggy when he poked his head up out of a manhole, and the president of the DAR for the state of South Dakota, and so on. But I want you to know, I'm not bragging about these ancestors. I've done nothing to deserve them or not deserve them. And I might have liked these folks, and they might have liked me or not. I'm bragging about not going through my life, not knowing about these ancestors, that I got out from under the shame of being a bastard, got out from under my fear of my parents feeling abandoned, got out from under my fear of maybe not finding anybody, got out from under the law that still withholds my original identity from me. That I got out from all this is what I'm proud of.
Oh, I've heard you read that so many times, and I have to say, I've said this to you, Penny, every time you read any of your poems, they feel fresh and new to me. And I absolutely love, because they carry such truth and education. They carry truth and education for people who are willing to listen to your heart and your head. So thank you. It's such a powerful way of educating us. I'm aware that you were drawn to the field naturally. You were born into being in the adoption world because you were born into adoption. So when I ask people why are they drawn into their work, well, you didn't really have a choice, did you?
No. And we had talked about this question of what could I tell people about myself that had nothing to do with adoption?
Right.
And it was hard to find anything about me that's not connected to adoption. More than half my closest friends are adopted people. It just goes on and on. And so, yeah, I'm a parent, but by adoption and so on.
Grandparent by adoption.
Yes, I'm only a grandparent through my having adopted my two kids. Yeah.
So intergenerationally, and the impact and connection to your family of origin and your family by adoption, you represent for us what we talk about as the constellation, all the people that are touched in the previous generations and the generations to come. You're the linchpin, and your poetry literally educates and leaves a legacy for everybody involved, which I love. Interesting. I wonder how many adopted people we would interview who would say that almost everything about their life is about adoption. And we are going to be interviewing other adopted people, so I'll be curious to, bring that up, because I think it's a great question.
That reminds me, I hope this is not inappropriate, but that reminds me of our mutual friend, Tom Brosnan, who's a Catholic priest. And I remember him one time saying in a presentation that even peeing in the woods would be, for him, affected somehow by his being adopted.
Really?
That nothing, because, well, let me tell you another good story. I went to a reading once by Harold Brodkey, who was a writer. And he read this thing that was a very sexy story that had just been published in Ms. Magazine, by the way. And at the end, he asked for responses or questions. And somebody up much closer to him than I was said, well, I'd like to hear about your theory of language after this sexy, juicy, colorful story. And he said, well, I was adopted And I feel that that has influenced my relationship to language. He said, because when I was in first grade, the teacher said, okay, class, what is a mother?
Wow.
And somebody in one of his little classmates said, she's the person who gave birth to you. And little Harold Brodke said, that's not who my mother is. My mother didn't give birth to me. I was adopted. So, and then I'm in the back row and I go, ha. And he says, oh, she's adopted.
Yeah. And there is something about words and being adopted that, because I'm not an adopted person, all of you that I consider friends who have been impacted by the experience of being adopted have a way with language that goes way beyond anything I have ever seen. And I think you must come into the world looking for truth through words. You hear differently and respond differently, and your words carefully
and our reality is different from other people's. It is essentially different. Yeah. And I think I once thought about what it is that adoptees have in connection with each other, and it's pretty much almost something that cannot be articulated.
Yes.
But I think it has to do with knowing that in our childhoods there was a kind of loneliness.
Wow. Okay.
That we don't have to explain to each other, because we couldn't possibly explain it to ourselves almost.
An absence. Yeah. Wow. So when you're gone and somebody comes across you in the Unitarian churchyard, what would you want on that gravestone?
Well, she brought adopted people together, and she was able to put some of their experience into words.
Yes. And putting that experience into words has done what? What is your hope for that?
It made us feel more belonging on this earth, and it made us feel more real.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you thought about and you want to make sure you can say as we move towards the end of the interview? Any final thoughts, Penny? And I know you put a lot of thought into this.
No, I'd rather read just one more poem if I can.
Absolutely. Sure.
Or Sharon, shall I read the grief poem?
No, I will say to anybody who's watching that Penny did write a series of poems to go with our 7 core issues, which was such an honor. But I'd like you to pick whatever one you'd like to leave the audience with.
All right.
So many powerful poems.
The one I'd like to read is too long. It's Portrait in 5 Parts of a Daughter of 4 Parents, which I built another performance piece around. So let me figure out this Pandora one. Oh yeah, perfect. This is called Pandora in Later Life. And what if I had not? I would be dead by now, dead of my anger, dead of my goodness, dead of my anger at my stinking goodness. Imagine yourself in a room with a box, and you don't know what's in it, and you don't know why you shouldn't. When you closed your eyes, you would see that box. When you opened your eyes, you would see that box. That box was my life. My life was in the box. When I opened the box, I was letting out my life. Oh, you get blamed because of other people's closed boxes. But even with all of the openings and closings my life has been since then, I have not ever once, even a single second, regretted it.
What a beautiful, beautiful offering. Penny, I could talk to you for hours. You represent
Same here.
you represent so much to the adoption community, and I know people are going to want to know how to get hold of your poetry, because you're going to touch a lot of people who didn't know about you. When you give us the information to post on the NCAP website, would you include some way that folks could get more poetry from you?
Of course.
Thank
Of course. And here's my I guess it's my most recent book of adoption poems.
Yes.
It's called The People They Brought Me, Poems in the Adoption Community. And I have quite a few copies of it that I'd be happy to practically give away.
Be careful when you say that.
Before I shuffle off, as my father used to say.
Penny, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and know that you're treasured.
Thank you.